Hello, everyone, and welcome to Insulate Sherborne. We are more than happy to say that we're going to be talking to Jenny Morisetti today. Now, in case you've not been keeping up with her CV, let me just tell you, trustee and champion for Sustainable Dorset, founding member of the Dorset Climate Action Network, and a founder of Hawker's Recreatives, which is a hub for sustainable fashion. But however wide that conversation could become, we're going to focus in and we want to talk about the thing that's really up for us in and around Sherborne now, and that is about insulation, and specifically how we should go around insulating the older properties, of which we have many. Julia Findlater joins us of Insulate Sherborne, and she's brought her own old property with her. So, Julia, I'm going to sit back and just let you kick off, and then we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
Thank you, John. As a lover of old historic buildings, I bought this old historic building about 4 years ago, not realising when I spoke to the planners, Jenny, that I had to replace like for like. So those lovely windows that had to be replaced with single pane glass. I've got lots of old beams in the house, lots of cracks. So it's lovely. This house breathes, but it's very drafty and cold. I haven't got pots of money left because I spent it all on restoring the house, but I do want to be a little bit warmer this winter. What can I do?
Yes, I quite sympathise with that, because my house is equally old, but it's luckily now not so drafty. And when we bought it, it was in a pretty dire state. We had our windows repaired so they don't have drafts anymore. And I have a little box of tricks here, so I can recommend a few additions. I'll just quickly find, right. So if you have got any drafts left, doesn't look very neat, but this is actually made of wool with sticky back up on the back, so that any gaps in your windows, the way they fit, can be filled, and then they'll shut tightly, and that will stop some of the draft coming through. And then after that, if you can buy thermal blinds, they're not too expensive and quite easily available. And then you'll be adding another layer of insulation against the glass. And then after that, if you add some thick insulation to your curtains, like this sort of thing, or use an old blanket or something else similar. The problem with all those ideas is that you don't want to be sitting all day in the dark. So if you want something that's going to work in the winter and give you daylight, you can use secondary glazing. You can have a perspex or a similar material cut to size, and then with magnetic strips affixed to both the perspex and the window frame, you can stick that on, and then in the summer it can be removed and stored somewhere ready for next winter. So those are some ideas to improve the windows.
That sounds really helpful, actually. And what about condensation? Because that's always sort of, I do find a problem with condensation. The condensation getting in between the secondary glazing and the glazing, or does that? I don't quite understand the science of condensation. I know it's to do with dew points, but does that become a problem?
Yes, it does. And there are a couple of methods of getting around that. One is the sheep's wool that you can buy. Well, I don't know, it's sort of treated, this one. So you can have sheep's wool is very absorbent. And if you put that in between the two layers of either the perspex and glass, that would absorb and then release when it's drier. Or you can get crystals and they would do the same. So I've had them before in a little tray, and they absorb the moisture so that they get rid of some of the condensation. I mean, it's not a complete solution because you are going to get condensation. And then if you can afford, once you've got a bit more money saved up, you can always go for the proper double internal glazing that would be perhaps have less condensation.
Can I just share this with you? When we first moved to Dorset, we were living in a farmhouse between Dorchester and Bridport, up on the ridge there. And my word, it was elemental. It really was. And the end wall of the north facing end wall of the farmhouse was the wall of our bedroom. And you could do this with it, and you could feel your fingers turn to ice. So Annabelle, my partner, being a creative person, we made a kind of a vertical duvet. So it's like a tapestry, but it actually had insulating properties in it. And then we hung it on the wall, and it looked fantastic until the day we took it down and realized we'd created a farm for black mold. Because in all of that, we'd forgotten that we did need air movement. We didn't need, what we didn't want was cold radiation, but we needed to have air movement, and we just hung it straight onto the wall. And of course, it wasn't condensation, but it was damp, and it was an incredible sight, and really quite scary, given that it was our bedroom. And it was one of those things that we went, they never tell you that in medieval castles when you have huge, massive tapestries. But presumably they had the same problem. So it's sometimes it's not just as straightforward as putting up something that will stop a draft or cold radiation. You've actually got to actively engage with it.
You've raised a really good point there, John. Thank you for that, because the key thing is really ventilation. So if you can open your windows every morning in the bedrooms after you've been sleeping there, obviously there's moisture in the air. If you can open the windows after you've had a shower, all those things help. Having just said, put up a secondary glazing onto your window, that's not going to make it very easy for opening it. But certainly having air, having ventilation, that really is the key. So that, if you, for example, board your loft and fill it with insulation, you've got to also make sure that there is ventilation in place as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right, Jenny, because it does feel counterintuitive, doesn't it? So this morning, as I had my shower, and the house was just full of moisture. So I opened the back door, and, my partner looked at me as if I was mad. But actually, within a few minutes, it had all gone. And, close the door and then keep what's left of the heating. Can I just go back to the crystals? Because after this Zoom, I'm going out to buy some. What should I be asking for?
I have to say, some years ago since we had some, so I don't know exactly what they're called, but it's the same sort of thing that you'd find, if you bought something new and it's got the crystal pouch in it.
It's silica, isn't it?
Silica, yes, yeah. Maybe it is.
Right.
And I don't know how eco-friendly that is, but if it can absorb the moisture, then obviously that's helping another problem. So try the sheep's wool first.
Yeah, will. Yeah. And with the sorry, because I'm going to overcome this problem with the sheep's wool. If I'll line the windows with the tape, which I have got, I just haven't put it up yet. But actually, the naked sheep's wool itself would just a sort of artfully placed lump of sheep's wool, would that work in the same way as absorbing the moisture?
Well, that's what I think, because in my barn, we just, John mentioned earlier about the Sustainable Fashion Hub. It's in an old barn and it does get damp in there. And I cover everything with lots of cotton, thick fleeces, and they absorb the moisture rather than putting it onto the fabric. So, yes, I mean, it's very absorbent and it should work. I mean,
would a bowl of salt work, do you think?
Bowl of salt, yes, that could do the same, couldn't it? Yes, yeah.
Okay. At what point
experiment away and report back?
Yes.
Yeah, let us know. I'm the one here who's not living in an old house. I'm up on Foster's Field in a house that's less than 20 years old, and it is very interesting that yes, there are still drafts, but I don't know whether they are drafty drafts or ventilation drafts. And I really understand when if you are struggling to keep the place warm in the first place, that something that is meant to be there ventilating the house is actually causing discomfort.
Yes, you want
control. This is a very,
draft.
very difficult balance, isn't it?
Yeah. So on your windows, have you got little ventilation grills at the top? So you can control those. So you can shut them when, perhaps in the evening, and then have them open in the day. So that's our whole problem with an old house. You want to have drafts, if you like, or ventilation, but you want to be able to control it. You don't want it controlling your comfort.
Is there any science around the placing of a draft excluder, a sausage dog? We just moved. The reason I ask is that, again, it's an experiment that we're going through. We've been keeping it on the front door because we felt that that was where it was a little bit drafty, and we've just moved it from the front door to the door that leads into our sort of sitting room stroke kitchen, on the basis that we don't really care if the hall gets cold, but we do care if the kitchen gets cold. Is there any recommendation around that?
I would buy a second one so that you can keep the draft out at the front door, and then also be, draft free inside, because the further away you can keep the drafts, the better. Because the other idea is that if you've got, for example, a loft hatch, or if you've got the door to a bedroom you don't use, you should insulate those or draft proof those so that that's not adding more cold air into the house. So, because it's all, you might think, oh, well, I won't put the radiator or the heating on in that bedroom because I don't use it. But then if you've got big gaps under the doors, the cold air from that room is coming into the rest of the house. Yes,
that is an issue, isn't it? Because just because the room's not in use, it is still part of the house.
And on
so,
that,
so there's a balancing act there.
Yeah. So Jenny, would you recommend that? So I've got the 2 bedrooms shut at the moment, and the heating's off in there. Should I put a sausage dog in front of the door in, so that it's kind of stopping any drafts coming in from those rooms into the rest of the house?
Yes, I mean, if it's drafted, if the door doesn't sort of snugly fit and there is draft coming through, yes. And the other thing is that you can get a sort of thicker version of this tape that does fit under a door. So it slightly squashes down. So it is, blocking out the draft if you don't want the sausage in front of the door.
Yeah. Okay.
Jenny, at what point do we start talking about insulating internal walls?
Yeah, so for an old property, this can be quite problematic, because if you've got lime plaster on the wall, you're not then going to fit thick insulating boards that are straight when you've got, well, I mean, there's many reasons not to do it to a lime plastered wall. So the property here had no plaster on the wall. It had been removed, and there were quite severe cracks throughout the stonework. So our restoration meant that we were able to make sure there was hair in the first layer of lime, and then something called Leica, which is small clay balls that were put into the second coat of plaster. And those also help with condensation and insulation. So we've now got very thick plaster walls, and we were also able to insulate under the floor, because the floor had completely rotted away. So with a combination of a limecrete floor and underfloor heating, the room, even without the heating on, it doesn't feel like a damp, old house feel. So if you are not, of course, that's not an ideal solution for everyone who's already got their walls plastered. And if you're looking, you would look round the whole house as a whole house approach. Maybe look on the outside first and see if you've got render on the external walls. Is that a lime render? Because if it's not, and you've got lime plaster on the inside, then those walls aren't going to be able to breathe, and that won't help problems with sort of damp and so on. So that unfortunately would be quite an expense to re-render the property, or to repoint it if it's got any cracks on the outside walls, because again, moisture could be coming in through that way. So really, for old properties, wall insulation is not, I can't say you can rule it out, because when we say old properties, how old do we mean? But we're talking here, 300 or 400-year-old stone properties probably wouldn't be suitable, unless it was, say, an extension, and then perhaps you could have it put there. So you really want to look at the other forms of insulation in the roof, and just making sure you're draft proofing and that the house is working well.
And what about chimney spaces? The best way of dealing with those?
Yeah, so a chimney that's unused could have the addition of a chimney sheep, which is a piece of wool made into the shape of your chimney recess. And it can often have a wire so that you can take it out when you want to use the fireplace. And you can also buy a chimney balloon, which is, as it explains, blown up to the sides of your chimney. So there's two solutions there, which are very, almost very cheap, so or under £20. So that should be an easy solution.
Yeah, we put a chimney balloon into the farmhouse, and I can say it definitely worked.
Oh,
that was downstairs, behind the sofa. Behind the sofa. So cold.
Also for heating, actually, you do want to make sure that you haven't got any furniture or anything in front of radiators, and you can put radiator reflectors at the back of the radiator so that they're reflecting the heat into the room rather than getting lost. Because it's a big job to fit underfloor heating, but if you were in a situation where you needed to replace your floor, then it really would be worth fitting underfloor heating at that time. Because if you're going towards looking at having an air source or ground source heat pump to be heat pump ready, you want to get used to having a low level of heating continually rather than having your heating on hot, twice a day.
Does that idea of having a low general temperature through the day, is there then an assumption that we will also change our fashion habits? We will wear an extra layer. We will wear a woolly hat and gloves, maybe. Is that an assumption that we talk about with heat pumps? And because we try not to go to that place. We try to imagine that there are these interventions we can make, and it doesn't really make any difference to the way we live. But I'm not comfortable with that. I think there is a quid pro quo here that yes, we can expect a lot from the building, but we have to come back and make sure that we're wearing woolly socks or whatever it might be.
I think we have got to look at changing our habits in some way, because I don't think we can go back to the days of let's have the house as hot as we can and open the windows if we're too hot. And yes, we do need to think about our clothing and what we're wearing appropriate for the time of year. And to be sitting in shirt sleeves, in the middle of winter, that shouldn't be an expectation. But the myth of the idea of a heat pump and then having to be cold, I would say that we had a ground source heat pump installed earlier in the year, and I know we haven't reached the depths of winter yet, but we certainly haven't got it on full capacity. And we have, because of the underfloor heating, had in the past just a gradual heat throughout the house rather than having it on certain times of day. And so we've just got that sort of 14 degrees continual warmth. That might not sound very warm, but because you're not cooling the house right down and you've got that constant temperature, it feels a comfortable place to be in. And obviously, if it does feel, it's snowing or something, it can easily be turned up to a higher temperature. And then we have got the addition of a wood burner, so that helps as well.
Jenny, with ground source heat pumps, could you just say a little bit about, because I think I live right in the middle of Sherborne in the town, and I've always assumed I couldn't have one because I don't have enough space. How much space do you need in order to have one that works effectively?
Yes, that's a very good point, because yes, you do need, if you're going to have the ground loops, a considerable amount of land to have the pipework put in. If you're going to have boreholes, then obviously you don't need so much space, but you do need to be able to get the machinery in to dig the boreholes, so it wouldn't fit in a sort of street situation. And in the future, people might be looking at communal heating, so that the heat pump system is sited somewhere away from a particular property, but it does heat several properties at once. That's obviously an easier thing to achieve on a new build, but there is a village in Suffolk, can't remember its name, but they've gone in for some form of community heating. And an air source heat pump would be another option, because that would be easier to install without having any land to put in the ground source.
Do you need
element.
planning permission for an external air heat pump?
If you're in a conservation area and you're siting the pump, the pump or the air source outside an external piece of machinery, you would need to check with your local council or planning department whether you need permission for that. And if it's a listed building, yes, you would do. But there are, slight relaxation of some of the rules for PV panels and so on. If they're on a rear-facing roof, if they're not visible from the highway, if they're on an ancillary building or on the ground but not visible from the highway, then they are allowed.
Okay.
And forgive me, my understanding of air source heat pumps, I thought they wouldn't work in an older building because you can't make an older building airtight. Is that not the case?
No, I know several examples of people having air source heat pumps fitted. It's not so much completely airtight, but it's again this, it does help if you have got underfloor heating downstairs. And I know that there's also things saying, working out the calculation that you've got to have 22 degrees heat in a bathroom, or you've got to have certain size radiators. But I would, I don't say, don't tread on any toes, but I would slightly dispel that, because we've got quite small radiators here, and I wanted to see how warm it felt before we went to the expense of having big radiators put in. Well, it wasn't just the expense, it's also in an old property, the radiators can look quite ugly, and if you can have small ones that don't show as much, then I think that's a better solution. And again, we haven't found that we feel we need larger radiators. So I think it's finding the right installer to work with an older property. So that's, yeah.
You've just preempted exactly what I was going to ask you there, because we've moved a long way from a sausage dog lying in front of the door, and Julia will tell us all about the workshop day that Insulate Sherborne is organising for January. But when it comes to the bigger works, and we'll blithely say, so when we install underfloor heating, and meaning that when we pay for somebody else to install underfloor heating, how important do you think it is to go with someone who's got a good track record in doing that kind of work? This is not general building work we're talking about here, is it?
Underfloor heating is pretty much, and quite a lot of people do it themselves. It's the ground source heat pump and the air source heat pump that's obviously more specialised.
I was thinking more about getting the advice on if you want to engage possibly with insulating walls and such like.
Yes.
At that point, you need somebody who's a bit of an expert.
You do. So I'm an energy efficiency retrofit advisor for pre-1919 buildings. And there are several other sort of qualified people in the field. So you would, if you were looking at the whole house approach and you wanted to follow the PAS 2035, which has recently come out, you would go to an assessor to come around and have an initial look with some ideas of what you might be able to do. Then you might commission a detailed report from a surveyor or architect, or even the installer, to detail all the things that you could have done to the house. And then the installer would then usually be appointed. And then after the work has been done, it needs to be monitored to see how effective it is. So doing the whole house is something that then you could have a plan, and maybe over time sort of make sure that you're covering everything. But I would start with an EPC first, because an EPC is relatively cheap to have done, under £200, and that will give you guidance as to what measures you could put into the house. And it will also give you a starting point and an aim. So if you're at the moment a rating of D, for example, and then you could think, well, I just make this measure, make this change, and then I'll be up to a C and then a B and so on. But we have got 177,000 properties in Dorset to retrofit, and nearly 30 million in the country. So it's quite a lot of work to be done.
It kind of puts it in perspective, really, doesn't it? It puts it a bit in perspective of how slow we've been.
Yes, yes.
This
Well, we do
conversation,
have-
this conversation could have been held 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yes, well, I think they made quite inroads when they had the government had the program for insulating properties, and it's a shame that stopped really. But you know, the UK has the largest number of, or the oldest housing stock in Europe, so we have got quite a struggle on our hands.
Yeah. What we'll do is that we'll make sure, because there might be some people just watching this podcast going, where do I go? Where do I go? We'll put some contact details at the end of the video, so that people will have email addresses and telephone numbers or whatever. So leave that with us. Julia, do you want to pick up on anything, or do you just want to? Should we finish off with a little promo for our workshop day?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've learnt from you, Jenny, is very heartening. That older properties can go down the route of air source heat pumps, and ground source if they've got the space, but also, you know, those solar panels, you know, so that these are all within our grasp, which I think we've been told, you know, by the planners and the conservation officers that we can't even look at those with older properties. So I think that's been really helpful. And the plug is on January the 14th, 2023, Insulate Sherborne will be running a workshop at St Paul's Church Hall, details on our website, where it's going to be a practical session. The sausage dogs, which I've now counted, I need at least 2 more, how to make them, get a template, how to make them, how to line your curtains in an easy way for those of us that can't find their way around a sewing machine. And also Peter Bywater from Healthy Homes Dorset will be there to offer advice where you can get grant if you're eligible as well, but also practical helps on advising all kinds of homes.
And of course, you're welcome to come and join us, Jenny. No
Oh,
pressure.
yes, I will. That sounds very good. I think I just leave also with one quick line, which I would say, when you're thinking about retrofitting, think of fluff before bling. So insulate and draft proof your home before spending lots of money.
Well, that sounds like a headline to finish on, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Fluff
Yes.
before bling. Thank you very much. Jenny, thank you very much for your time. Julia, thank you very much for your time. I'll thank myself for my time.
Thank you.
And we will see you all on the 14th of January and later, if not. And thank you very much for watching.